Have you ever had someone in power push you so far that, instead of breaking down, you found the strength to rise higher than they could ever imagine? That was me, trapped in a war with my very own homeowners association, a group that was supposed to protect our neighborhood but turned into my worst nightmare. They thought they could bully me, bury me in fines, and even drag me through court. What they didn't expect was that I would fight back with patience, strategy, and a kind of determination that only grows when you've been humiliated and underestimated one too many times. And in the end, I didn't just beat them. I took the very seat of their president, leaving the man who tormented me speechless in front of the same neighbors he once ruled over. It all started the day I moved into my home, full of excitement about a new beginning. My wife and I had saved for years to buy this place. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours, and it felt like the start of the life we always dreamed about. The first few weeks were peaceful, until I got a neatly folded letter in my mailbox. The HOA president, a man named Carl, had written that my front yard was not up to community standards because a single patch of grass had dried out. I thought it was some kind of joke. I had just moved in, and this was the first message from my so-called welcoming committee. I brushed it off, but the letters kept coming, each one nastier than the last. The fines piled up over tiny, ridiculous things: my trash bin being visible for a few hours after pickup, a holiday decoration they said was too large, and even a complaint that my car wasn't parked at the right angle on my own driveway. At first I tried to comply. I thought maybe if I just kept quiet and fixed things, they'd leave me alone. But Carl thrived on control. He would show up at meetings and speak to people like he was the king of the neighborhood. His favorite line was, "If you don't like the rules, then you shouldn't have moved here." It was smug, condescending, and I could see how much pleasure he took in making others feel small. What I didn't realize yet was that I wasn't his only target. The whole neighborhood feared him, but I happened to be his newest victim, and he was going to make an example out of me. The breaking point came when he sent a letter claiming I owed over $3,000 in fines, and that if I didn't pay, they'd sue me and put a lien on my house. I sat at my kitchen table with that letter in my hands, my chest tight, my hands shaking. I remember my wife's worried face as she asked, "What are we going to do?" I felt cornered, like a trapped animal, and something in me snapped. No more bending, no more apologizing for imaginary crimes. If Carl wanted a war, I was going to give him one. I started digging. I researched the HOA's bylaws late at night, poring over pages of legal jargon until my eyes blurred. I discovered loopholes, inconsistencies, and shady practices that the board had been getting away with for years because nobody had challenged them. I attended every meeting, sitting quietly in the back while Carl smirked at me, probably thinking I was too scared to fight. But I was listening, observing, and slowly building connections with my neighbors. It turned out many of them hated Carl, but they were too intimidated to speak up. He thrived on that fear, but I started having private conversations, listening to their frustrations, letting them know they weren't alone. Slowly, I built a quiet alliance. Meanwhile, Carl pushed harder. He followed through on his threat and filed a lawsuit against me for unpaid fines. Walking into that courtroom was one of the most nerve-wracking moments of my life. He strutted in like he had already won, whispering to his lawyer with that smug grin plastered on his face. But I had come prepared. I presented evidence that the fines were unlawful, that the board had failed to follow its own processes, and that Carl had been selectively targeting certain homeowners. I'll never forget the look on his face when the judge dismissed most of his claims and warned him about potential abuse of power. It wasn't a full victory, but it was enough to plant seeds of doubt about his invincibility. And it gave me confidence. That night, lying in bed, I realized the only way to truly stop him was to beat him at his own game. So I decided to run for the HOA board. Carl laughed when he heard. He told me to my face, "You don't stand a chance. Nobody will vote for you." But what he didn't know was that the neighborhood was ready for change. I spent weeks knocking on doors, talking to people, listening more than I spoke. I heard stories of Carl finding an elderly widow because her son parked in her driveway, of him threatening families for having kids' bikes outside, of him raising dues without explanation. People were tired, angry, and desperate for someone to finally stand up to him. I promised transparency, fairness, and respect. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if I was in over my head. Carl was ruthless. He spread rumors about me, claiming I was irresponsible, even saying I had plans to dismantle the HOA entirely and ruin property values. But the more he tried to smear me, the more obvious his desperation became. When election night came, the community hall was packed. Carl was up front, confident as ever, smirking like he always did. As the votes were counted, I could feel the tension rising in the room. First tally, I was ahead. Second tally, still ahead. And then the final count came in. I had won by a landslide. For the first time in years, Carl's smirk disappeared. His face turned red, his jaw tightened, and he sat in stunned silence as the announcement was made. I was the new HOA president. The room erupted in applause. Neighbors came up to shake my hand, some with tears in their eyes, thanking me for finally standing up to him. And Carl? He stormed out without a word, humiliated in front of everyone he used to control. The victory was sweet, but it wasn't about humiliating him. It was about taking back our community. Over the next few months, I worked with the board to roll back unfair fines, set up transparent budgeting, and actually listen to homeowners. The mood of the neighborhood changed almost overnight. People started decorating their yards again without fear. Kids played outside without complaints, and neighbors actually smiled at each other in the street. As for Carl, he tried to stir trouble a few times, but nobody cared anymore. His power was gone, and every time I saw him walking his dog past the clubhouse, head down, avoiding eye contact, I felt that deep satisfaction of knowing I had turned his reign of fear into his personal downfall. Looking back, I realized something important. Revenge doesn't always mean fighting fire with fire. Sometimes it means outlasting, outsmarting, and turning someone's own game against them. Carl thought he was untouchable, but in the end, he was undone by his own arrogance. I didn't just win for myself. I won for everyone he had stepped on. And the sweetest part, I never had to raise my voice, never had to stoop to his level. I simply showed the neighborhood who he really was, and they did the rest. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been made to feel powerless, let this story be proof. You're stronger than you think, and sometimes the best revenge is patience, strategy, and letting karma work through you. Because when the dust settles, bullies like Carl always fall, and it's the people who endure that rise to the top.